So I don't know about anyone else, but something that really gets my goat is electioneering that is done incredibly cynically, right? Passing policy specifically so that you are hampering your opponent to the next general election, I think is something that is really poor form, right? Because I believe, obviously, in democracy. I think that people using democracy to undermine democracy is not great, for example. Now, one of the things I think is not great that undermines democracy is trying to restrict people's access to vote. And one of those things that you can use to restrict people's access to vote is voter ID. Now, I don't need to tell anybody, everyone's probably all well aware, but there is going to be voter ID at elections moving forward. The accepted forms of voter ID are basically all old people stuff. They've explicitly chosen voter ID that old people can have but young people can't. For example, right, if we actually look at the list of IDs that's available, Oyster 60 plus card, 16 over Welsh concessionary travel card, right? Older person's bus pass, for example, 60 plus smart pass. Like, you can get a young person's Oyster card and it's not included in the accepted forms of voter ID. Senior smart pass, concessionary travel card. There's just loads of things that old people can use, right? And if you're a young person, nothing. It has to be basically just passport or driving license. Like, none of these local travel things, any of these, are voter ID that any young person is likely to have. I wonder why a Conservative Party might want to exclude young people from voting specifically. I wonder why they might do that. It's a bit weird, isn't it? Well, it's funny when you actually look at the voting demographics, and I think that the difference between Conservative Party vote amongst retired people and under 25s, there's like a 50% difference. So this is literally... Thank you for the follow. This is clearly being done incredibly cynically, basically to undermine democracy and to disenfranchise a whole group of voters, right? You got a license for that vote, bruv? What's actually quite funny is that if you look, like, this is only data from the US, so I don't know about what it's like in the UK, but from the US, because I think Johnny Harris had a video about this, talking about how actually voter ID in most cases further reduces the right-wing vote than it does the left-wing vote, right? Counterintuitively, you'd think that it'd be more likely to have worse influence on people who are poorer and or younger, right? Those are the two people that you would try to disenfranchise with voter ID, but counterintuitively, it actually does half suppress some of the right-wing vote because a lot of them are idiots, unfortunately. And also, older people are just forgetful. They might not even have access to it, but they don't drive. They're probably less likely to travel, so it's like they have to have passports or whatever as well. And what's the chances that you're bringing your concessionary travel cards to the voting booth unless you explicitly know already that you're going to need it on the way, right? So actually, when you look at things, this might not have the intended effect that it would do. All it's going to do is turn away people who should have the legal, democratic, and inalienable right to vote taken away from them for no fucking good reason, right? There's basically no voter fraud in this country at all. There's even less like per capita instances of voter fraud in the UK than there are in the United States, right? So even with all of the stuff around the integrity of the election in the United States that got bandied about in the wake of 2020, there's even less of an argument for doing it over here than there is over here. Old people do vote most of all. They absolutely do, right? But they are also people who are likely to be hit by not having ID when they should have ID to be able to vote, right? Old people do vote a lot. But as I said, there are plenty of reasons why they might be caught out by not having voter ID when they need to have it to be able to vote. That's the real issue. That you can clearly see what's being done here when you look at the Oyster card differential here. Voter fraud is a myth to justify voter suppression. Well, exactly, right? And you may say, no justice. Have you not looked at the European countries? They have voter ID to be able to vote. Yet, of course, these are countries that actually provide people with an identity card regardless, because you can use your identity card to travel within Schengen, for example. I mean, both the Republicans and the Conservative Party both have explicitly used voter ID to try and disenfranchise groups of voters who they feel are less likely to have access to that ID, right? In the United States, it's far more around racial lines than it is around age demographics, because actually, if you look at the UK, the biggest divide in voting apart from race is age. Obviously, when you look at racial divides, they're pretty wide in the UK as well. But the class divides between race aren't as big in the UK as they are in the US, so it's the statistics are pretty murky. Friend of the show, Mr. Darren Grimes, the crafty wank himself, he says that Labour's Angela Rayner loses it over voter ID campaign. I wonder what justification he'll have for this, so let's watch.
Well, folks, Labour are once again criticising voter ID as the Electoral Commission launched an awareness campaign to inform voters of changes around it.
It also, again, considering how, I'm going to stop the video after 10 seconds in. It is also amusing how we have a government here that is urging fiscal discipline. Or we can't engage in fiscal expansion. We're in the middle of an inflationary crisis. We've got massive inflation, despite the fact they engaged in fiscal expansion to be able to give us the energy price guarantee, which also brought down inflation, but nevertheless, I digress. When they're continually telling us, oh, there's no money for the NHS, there's no money for pay rises for the public sector, there's no money for, to be able to improve all of the things that the state should be control of. They're very happy to splurge millions of pounds away on a campaign, an awareness campaign for a voter ID bill that they should never have bothered being put in place in the first place and was completely pointless and had no justification for. And now they're having to try and find some justification for the fact they're going to spend millions of pounds of the Exchequer's money to be able to inform people about the voter ID campaign that they did for cynical reasons, right? So it's a legitimate criticism to say that, this awareness campaign was a waste of money, because it kind of is.
It doesn't take a genius, right, in my view, to figure out why Labour is so vehemently opposed to voter ID. They're more animated about this issue, let me tell you, than they ever were about the grooming gang scandal that took place over recent years, ensuring that...
there we go. Considering we just did a Tommy Robinson segment, the fact that we're now on a Darren Grimes segment, and he's immediately saying, well, have you considered, they think this issue is bad, but have you not considered the grooming gangs? Why are we complaining about voter ID when there's grooming gangs happening? I'm like, this is a completely different subject, Darren. What the fuck are you bringing this up about? This is complete nonsense. What are you doing?
That Prince Harry isn't the only ginger whinger out in force. The Labour Party's deputy leader, Angela Rayner, fumed on Twitter once again over the Conservative government's introduction of showing your ID when you cast your ballot in an election. Rayner tweeted, "This Tory voter ID plan is completely unworkable, unnecessary, and set to lock millions out of voting. It's an outrage they're spending yet more public money promoting disgraceful efforts to disenfranchise voters." Former Labour MP Kate Hoey sensibly replied, "Angela, this will not disenfranchise voters. It has worked extremely well in Northern Ireland for some time. It is just wrong to suggest that millions will be locked out of voting. Absolutely no reason for that to happen."
But Kate Hoey is just completely wrong. It will lead to millions of people not being able to vote, right? Maybe saying locked out of voting is incorrect verbiage, because they have the ability to apply to be able to get some kind of free ID from the government to be able to go and vote, but only if they remember to. And if they in these situations, they're essentially making huge amounts of effort to try and make sure that the hurdles to jump through for certain sections of the population are much larger than others, right? Because there are so many forms of random ID that young people don't have, but old people do have, meaning that the fact that certain groups of the population will automatically have more hoops to jump through if they don't have a passport or driving license. That's the issue that we have. This is where the disenfranchisement comes through, because people are having barriers put in their ability to exercise their inalienable democratic right to participate in the electoral process.
Yeah, folks, I don't recall Labour kicking off when it was introduced in Northern Ireland, do you? I don't recall hearing about the franchisement of Ulster's communities. And
I don't think there should be voter ID in Northern Ireland either. Thank you for the follow. Much appreciated. Welcome to the Justice stream. Hands up. I didn't know that there was voter ID in Northern Ireland. I am just learning this now. But if I'd have learned it at the time, I would have said exactly the same thing. It is also unnecessary for there to be voter ID in Northern Ireland. I don't know why there is. It's been devolved there, so whatever. They can do what they want. Do I think that it's wrong? Yes.
Also worth noting that the Tory plans include a free bit of ID for those without a driver's licence, without a passport or any other form of photo ID. So casting a vote won't any longer be easier than For example, picking up a parcel from the post office, for which you need to prove your identity. But why are Labour so opposed, you might ask yourself? Could it be
Because you're putting barriers up in front of people's right, exercising their democratic right to vote. I don't know why this is such a controversial position. Because the proponents of this do not have a defensible position. Because the only position they can ever take on this is because it reduces voter fraud. When voter fraud isn't a problem, it's never been a problem. Like, there is no defense for the proponents. All they can ever do, as Darren Grimes has done here, by vaguely gesturing at imagined hypocrisy by saying, well, you think voter ID is bad, but what about the grooming gangs? I got you there. Making them come to the polling stations about how they should have it online or whatever else. I mean, that is also true, right? That would also be easy, right? We've all got social security numbers, right? We could just do that online. I don't know why it needs to be done in person at all, right? You're from the UK, you've never seen this guy. Believe me, Morton, you are the lucky one. You are incredibly lucky to have never encountered Mr. Darren Grimes. So, background on Darren Grimes. So, he was a guy who was originally I think he was like a young Lib Dem. He got big prominence for being a young Lib Dem about 10 years ago or so, right? And then he got paid loads of money to be the face of Brexit for young people, right? And he switched his opinions on a dime, became pro-Brexit because he got given a bunch of money to be pro-Brexit. And then off the back of that, got a media profile because obviously being the face of Brexit meant that he suddenly had a profile they didn't have previously. And then he used that profile to then be a personality on Twitter, and then also to he then created a YouTube channel called Reasoned UK, which is now run by him through a shell company owned by the son of Lance Foreman, but he doesn't actually present it anymore. That's now Jess Gill, who's a star of TikTok. From his position as being famous on Twitter whilst also having his own YouTube channel, Darren Grimes then basically begged on both knees to try and get his own individual show on the new UK channel GB News, which he then got, and then was sacked from after like a year. And now he's back on YouTube with his Voice of Britain stuff. And I can only assume that it's Lance Foreman's seed money that's keeping him going, because he's got like 12k subscribers, which is only like 10 times the amount I have, and I'm literally nobody on YouTube. So, yeah, that's the story with Darren Grimes, and he's incredibly right-wing. Whether he believes this shit or not, I have no idea, right? It's an incredibly quick heel turn, given that he basically had his entire political opinions on Brexit shaped by the fact that he paid loads of money for it. He was paid loads of money to shill for it, essentially. So I have no idea whether he actually believes any of the shit that he says, but he's realised, like a lot of right-wing grifters, that there is loads of money to be made in engaging in the culture war. Right, he does loads of cultural things. He gets really angry about trans people on the internet a lot. He gets mad about like the royal family, all the kind of character, all of like incredibly, all of the things, incredibly characteristics of someone who is right wing but doesn't actually care about anything right wing, just wants to become famous on the internet because it's really easy to generate outrage clicks. Like if you actually have a look at the kind of the stuff the kind of content that he's got here on his actual YouTube channel, look at the videos that he's uploaded. Like Prince Andrew is now more popular than Prince Harry stuff, something about trans people, pro Boris stuff about immigration, and being anti, like talk about the boats or whatever, like stuff about identity politics stuff, a vague gesturing at imagined hypocrisy. Yeah, he is literally like the Geordie Dave Rubin. 100% the Geordie Dave Rubin. Yeah, I don't think he has any like hard and fast political prescriptions other than whatever makes him money. So yeah, I don't really have much more substantive than that to say. The historical barriers to having inclusive elections have been eliminated with technology, but we still rely on archaic models to keep participation down. True. Which is why, actually, I think the Brazilian election was really good. Is actually the Brazilian election was mostly electronic, so the voter fraud was basically non-existent, despite what Bolsonaro will say. And the results came in super quickly, right? They got a gigantic population, and they managed to get the result in like 3 hours.
That this fine selection suggests the reason after a quick Google search. 2 London Labour branches face investigation by party after allegation of electoral fraud made to police. Former Labour councillor jailed for electoral fraud in 2018 elections. Allegations of electoral malpractice in the recent Peterborough by-election, in which Labour won by 683 votes.
While an initial police inquiry found that no offences were revealed, they explained why certain areas are more susceptible to such claims than others. This is literally, this isn't. It's in the own screenshot that he showed us that there were no actual offences revealed. Like, if you're going to lie, like Darren, if you're going to lie to us, if you're going to try and misrepresent information, don't debunk it in the actual screenshot that you're showing us.
The General Secretary of the Labour Party has described an instance of voter fraud found to have been taken place during the trigger ballot process in Ilford South constituency Labour Party as an isolated incident, Labour list can reveal.
I mean, I'm gonna irritate the leftoids by telling you that this is nonsense. This didn't happen, and this was just Sam Tarry coping about the fact that he lost to Jazz Aswell. Like, I really like Sam Tarry, and I'm not massively keen on Jazz Athwell, although Jazz seems fine. He's big on council housing, so as Liberal councillors go, I'm not gonna massively complain. But Sam Tarry was adamant that he wanted to keep his Ilford South seat, and he lost fair and square. And the allegations of electoral fraud that happened in the Ilford South trigger ballot are complete nonsense. He does sound like a Dalek, doesn't he?
A man convicted of vote rigging has denied being part of the campaign team.
KF Logan with the raid of 33. Welcome. Thank you for joining in. Hope everyone's doing well.
Team for the Labour Party in Peterborough. Makes you think, folk. Peterborough.
Convicted vote rigger denies being part of Peterborough Labour Party campaign team. Man convicted of vote rigging has denied being part of the campaign team for the Labour Party. Oh, that's just right. Hamid, let me look up this article. Right, it's very. That's another thing that grifters will do. Is that they will post a headline and then the article will actually say the opposite of what they think it's supposed to say. Let me have a look. Where is it? Convicted vote rigger denies being part of. Let me actually have a look at this article. How you doing, Kev? You alright? A man who was jailed in 2008. So this was 15 years ago. It was 15 years ago that this guy was jailed for postal vote interference. So that's what you've got. Like, there was, what was it? One of them was in like a council election 2021. You have one from 15 years ago, and then you have one which was allegations that didn't even exist. That in the screenshot that you showed us, Darren, didn't even exist. It says not part of the campaign. Attended election council president events, including a visit from Jeremy Corbyn. He's not a member of the Labour Party, does not have a role within our campaign. He's not permitted to have access to Labour Party data or technology. We have robust systems in place to protect the integrity of the vote. So, this was a guy from 15 years ago convicted of vote rigging, who didn't even have any connection to the Labour Party, who isn't even a member of the Labour Party. Wayward Historian with a gifted sub. Thank you. Thank you very much for the support. Again, as always, welcome to the Justice Stream. It's always good to have you. Sadly, here in Peterborough, it seems that is not the case, as once again a convicted vote fraud is seemingly involved in the election campaigning for the Labour Party, as said by Councillor Wayne Fitzgerald, even though he's not a member and not part of the role within the campaign. So, like entirely full of nothing burgers. He included Clinically Insane with a follow. Welcome to the Justice Stream. Hope you're doing well. What are the other two that he puts up here? What's this one? Labour suspends East West Ham. Guardian. Politics, 2021. Let me have a look. Labour suspends East Ham and West Ham constituency parties. Allegation of electoral fraud made to the police. The Metropolitan Police confirmed it had made an assessment of a claim of electoral malpractice, but decided officers did not need to take further action. Oh, okay. Reported by Labour List, the allegations are to be wide-ranging and supported by a considerable amount of evidence. Understand that allegations of electoral fraud are being separately investigated by the Metropolitan Police. So the police aren't investigating, but Labour are? Yeah, literally no police investigation was required after an assessment. So this is also nonsense. These are literally just allegations that the police didn't even look into. What's the bet? Hang on a minute. Let me have a look. Let me Google, right? Let me just actually go to Google rather than Nicosia. Let me just Google Labour electoral fraud. I wonder if these are literally the first 4 results on Google if you search this. Another rotten borough. That's the 4th one. That's the Labour from East Ham one. Trigger ballot. That's the other one here. Literally, you search Labour electoral fraud on Google, and he just picked 4 of the top 6 and didn't even read the articles that confirmed that the allegations weren't even investigated by the police. Right? That is the level of journalism that you get from the Geordie Dave Rubin. Incredible. Like, it's so like he lies all the time. He lies so often it's unreal, right? Like, I responded to him on TikTok where he said that, well, we can't have solar power because if the sun's not out, we can't generate electricity and we can't store electricity. Yet and he said, he literally said, we don't have the technology to store electricity, despite the fact that pump storage hydroelectricity already exists. And if you go to the electrical storage page on Wikipedia, the photo at the top of the article is literally of a pump storage hydroelectricity storage facility in Wales, of all places, right? So he just makes shit up. He just makes shit up and then publishes it and expects people not to fact check him. Because let's face it, of course, nobody fact checks anyone apart from actual fact checkers or people from the opposition, right? Like, I very rarely, I'm going to say that, I very rarely fact check left-wing sources. I probably should more often. But even so, like, people are just like, oh, well, clearly there must be some massive problem with Labour electoral fraud, despite the fact that I've looked into 3 of the 4. 2 of them were just allegations. One of them was electoral fraud that was only ever an allegation in Ilford South, and because Sam Tarry was coping that he lost his trigger ballot. And there was no proof of anything here, right? Even after the ballot, even after Sam Tarry continually said, oh no, there's all this electoral fraud, no evidence was ever brought forward about it. So yeah, electoral fraud, not widespread, never really been a problem. Like, I don't know, maybe it's just me, right? I think that someone not being able to vote, even though they should be allowed to, because of some kind of discrepancy with ID, is far worse than one person voting twice. The one instance of electoral fraud is worse than is not as bad as someone not being able to vote when they should be able to. I don't know about anybody else, but someone having their inalienable right to vote taken away from them arbitrarily based upon whatever fucking shit's going on here is worse than any small amount of electoral fraud. Which if there's any election that's been swung because of electoral fraud, then I will be very surprised. I'll be very, very surprised. But it's interesting that he didn't even go for the regular one. He didn't even give us any reasons as to why voter ID was good. He just said Labour are bad for opposing it because something something grooming gangs, something something. There's been electoral fraud in Labour on one occasion. They already presume there will be voting error. One voter's not worth changing the whole system or losing thousands of legit voters. I guess that makes sense, yeah. Even so, just like Darren Grimes, as we did, busted, caught in 4K, just being an idiot. So, yeah, don't do voter ID, it's bad.